They expected her to yell, to break down, to beg. But instead, she stood still, silent, composed, unshakable. And in that stillness, Jasmine Crockett did what titles and politics never could. She made the world stop and look. Not because she was a congresswoman, but because she was a black woman who refused to be made small. What happened next turned one gate incident into a national reckoning, and you won't forget it. Before we dive into this story, take a moment to hit like and subscribe if you believe dignity should never depend on status. And in the comments, tell us, where are you watching from? Because stories like this don't just happen in airports, they happen everywhere. And the more we share them, the harder they are to ignore. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett didn't have the luxury of catching her breath. Not today. For nearly a month, she'd been operating on sheer willpower alone, shuttling between legislative hearings in Sacramento, policy panels in San Antonio, and a hastily scheduled town hall in Tulsa. Her carry-on had barely been unpacked between stops. But this trip wasn't about politics. This one was different. This one was personal. By 6:30 a.m., she stepped into Dallas Love Field, fatigue weighing on her shoulders like bricks. Her cousin Devin had passed, just 42, liver failure. They'd grown up side by side like siblings. Missing his funeral wasn't an option, no matter how little rest she'd had. Dressed in a simple black dress beneath her tailored blazer, Jasmine moved with quiet purpose, clutching a lukewarm coffee in one hand and her buzzing phone in the other as she walked toward the Southwest check-in counter. Her flight to Jackson, Mississippi was set to board at 7:10. The first red flag appeared in a glance. The young man at the counter barely looked at her before smirking subtly and returning to his screen. Jasmine had seen that kind of expression before, the microsecond judgment, the dismissive air. She handed him her ID and confirmation. "I'm on flight 2376 to Jackson. I'd like to check this bag." He tapped away for a moment before his brow furrowed. You're not in the system." Jasmine stayed composed. "That can't be right. I checked in an hour ago." She extended her phone, displaying her boarding pass. He glanced at it, then back at her with faint annoyance. "Your seat's been reassigned. You'll need to wait." "Reassigned to where?" she asked, her tone polite but firm. Instead of answering, he waved to a colleague behind him. "Hey, can you take a look at this?" Jasmine glanced at the time. 6:43. Her heart began to beat faster, but she kept her voice calm. "Can you just explain what the problem is? I'm heading to a funeral." The second employee arrived, barely glancing in Jasmine's direction before stating flatly, "She's flagged for random review. We need to re-verify credentials." Jasmine blinked, confused. "That's not standard. I've taken this flight 4 times this year. This has never happened." The first agent straightened. "Ma'am, if you don't calm down, I'll have to ask you to step aside." Her eyebrows lifted. "Calm down? I asked a question." "That's enough. Please step over there." Passengers nearby had started to take notice. Phones were raised. Someone murmured, "That's Congresswoman Crockett," but the revelation didn't seem to register with the staff. Jasmine moved aside, her jaw tight. She pulled out her federal ID. "I'm not concealing anything. This is an official trip." The second agent barely glanced at it. "ID doesn't override protocol," she replied curtly. Something in Jasmine's gut twisted. This wasn't a clerical error, it was deliberate. Still, she remained measured. "I'm willing to cooperate, but I'd like to speak to a supervisor." That's when the first agent signaled toward the back and muttered, "Security, please." Jasmine hadn't raised her voice, hadn't violated any rules. Yet now she was being treated like a threat. She stood silently at the counter's edge, her arms crossed, eyes fixed on a stain in the carpet. This moment called for poise, not panic. Behind her, whispers grew. Phones recorded from low angles. One woman met her eyes and mouthed, "I'm sorry." Jasmine gave a small nod in return. She appreciated the gesture, but it wouldn't change anything. 2 TSA officers approached, Not urgent, but not exactly casual either. That unsettling neutrality that said the decision had already been made. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us," one said. "For what reason?" Jasmine asked, unmoving. "Random screening. Please don't make this more difficult." She held out her boarding pass and government ID once again. "This is a valid flight. That's a real badge. The only issue here is the one you're creating." The officer didn't even glance at her documents. "Ma'am, we're not asking." There it was, the soft, sharpened edge of authority. Jasmine looked toward the gate. Flight 2376 was still scheduled, boarding in 10 minutes. She thought of her mother, already in Jackson, texting her where to sit. She thought of Devon's daughter, asking if Auntie Jazz would speak. Jasmine closed her eyes briefly and exhaled. Then she walked with the officers. They led her through a quiet side corridor, fluorescent lights buzzing faintly overhead. A third agent met them partway and whispered something out of earshot. The officers nodded. "We'll need to perform a full pat-down," one announced. "Your bag will also be searched. No warrant. No probable cause. No explanation," she said, her voice steady but low. "You're on thin ice." "You can file a complaint," one replied. "Later." She didn't argue. She stood still, arms extended. They searched her with cold precision, opened her bag, rifled through toiletries, and shuffled sensitive files without a word. 10 minutes passed, then 15. Finally, she asked, "Can someone explain why I was reassigned?" "Why I was pulled aside." One officer shrugged. "We don't handle seating. Airline flagged you. We were told you were uncooperative." Her voice finally cracked. "Uncooperative?" I asked a question. I didn't raise my voice. I followed every instruction. "We act on what we're told," he replied, emotionless. Jasmine checked the time. 7:16. The flight had already left. She didn't speak again. She sat in a cold metal chair, hands resting on her knees. Her eyes didn't move. It wasn't just a missed flight anymore. It was a broken promise, a visible punishment with no cause. One officer stepped out to make a call. The other leaned silently against the wall. Jasmine pulled out her phone and typed a message. "I was pulled. Missed my flight. I need you here." She sent it. The next person who walked through those doors wouldn't need to ask permission. Franklin Rhodes didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. 30 years on the federal bench had given him a presence sharper than any badge. When Jasmine's text arrived, just 3 words, "I need you," he didn't hesitate. He was already in the car, not far from the terminal. She had told him earlier not to worry, said it was a quick trip. But when Jasmine said need, she meant now. Back inside, Jasmine sat alone. The TSA officers had drifted a few steps away, whispering now, avoiding her eyes. Her bag was half-packed, her paperwork scattered, then carelessly shoved back in. She'd fixed it herself. Her blazer was wrinkled. Her hair, once neatly pinned, had fallen into loose curls. On the surface, she looked composed. But inside, she was fire. The agent who'd started this all stood at the end of the hall, arms crossed, eyes down. The one who called security had conveniently disappeared. At exactly 7:36, the automatic doors slid open. Franklin walked in, clad in a sharp charcoal coat, black slacks, and a maroon scarf Jasmine had given him last Christmas. His steps were slow but deliberate, his expression unreadable. Jasmine rose as soon as she saw him. She didn't need to say anything. She didn't have to. He scanned the room with the quiet intensity of a man who didn't need to announce himself. He never had. Franklin Rhodes took in the agents, the officers, and the scattered mess on the table. Then he turned to Jasmine. "You okay?" he asked. She gave a small nod. Nothing more. He pivoted to the nearest TSA officer. "Who's in charge?" The man hesitated. "Sir, may I ask who you are?" Franklin Rhodes, retired federal judge, Ninth Circuit. Now, who's in charge? The officer blinked, caught off guard. One moment. Franklin turned back to his wife. Tell me what happened. I questioned a reassignment of my seat. They said I was being disruptive. I showed them ID. They ignored it. I missed my flight. Did you yell? No. 'Cause a scene? No. Just then, the officer returned, now trailing a supervisor wearing a lanyard and holding a walkie-talkie. The man offered his hand tentatively. Judge Rhodes, we weren't aware that... Franklin didn't take the hand. Why was my wife's seat changed? I'd have to check with the gate team. Then check. The supervisor nodded and scurried away without another word. Franklin turned back to the original desk agent, the same one who had worn that smug, dismissive expression earlier. You, why did you call security? She wouldn't stand down, the young man stammered. She asked about her seat? Yes. Did she raise her voice? No. Threaten anyone? No. Franklin leaned in slightly, just enough to tilt the weight of the conversation his way. Do you understand what that is? It's called targeted escalation. You involved security without cause. You disregarded valid federal identification. You obstructed a sitting congresswoman's travel without justification. The agent swallowed hard. I didn't know who she was. It shouldn't matter. The silence that followed was dense, thick enough to vibrate. A passenger walking past noticed, paused, and pulled out her phone again. Word was spreading. Another staff member arrived, the one who'd been absent earlier. He took one look at Franklin, then Jasmine, and whispered something to the supervisor. That's when the apologies began. Ma'am, we deeply regret the... She doesn't need an apology, Franklin interrupted, voice cold and even. She needed dignity 20 minutes ago. The supervisor, flustered now, offered, We'd be happy to rebook you, first class, next flight out. Jasmine shook her head. He's not trying to get me a better seat. He's trying to get you to understand something. You don't get to treat people this way, not me, not anyone. But the window for grace had already closed. The damage had been done. Franklin didn't raise his voice. He never had to. His tone alone pressed down on the room like gravity. Moments later, the gate manager arrived, clipboard in hand, sweat already beading at his temples. His eyes flitted between the TSA agents and the couple standing firm. Judge Rhodes, Congresswoman Crockett, Save it, Franklin cut him off. We're not here for your introduction. I want a name. The man blinked. Sir? The name of the person who called security. The one who made my wife a problem for asking a question. The manager hesitated. That's a personnel matter. Franklin stepped forward, just enough to close the space between them. So is discrimination. His voice never lifted, but it struck like thunder. The manager glanced from Jasmine back to Franklin, shifting uncomfortably. I understand this is a serious issue. We're reviewing... No, Franklin cut in again. You're reacting. You're scrambling to cover yourselves. Behind them, the TSA officers had grown noticeably quiet. The desk agent who had dismissed Jasmine had vanished entirely, likely hiding farther down the terminal. Jasmine said nothing. Her arms were crossed, her silence now sharp, intentional. She wasn't going to cushion the blow. She wanted them to feel it. You escalated a non-incident, Franklin continued, ignored valid credentials, and interfered with federal travel, all because someone didn't like being questioned. The gate manager swallowed hard. I'll speak with my regional director. You'll do more than that, Franklin said flatly. There will be an internal review, a public apology, and accountability. Jasmine finally spoke. Her voice was quiet but carved from steel. Don't wait for him to demand it. You should have started the moment I was pulled aside. The room paused. Even the distant boarding calls over the intercom felt out of place here, like they belonged to a different world. Franklin looked at his watch. She missed a funeral, a promise, and you'll answer for that. Not just to her, but to everyone you've ever treated this way." The gate manager opened his mouth, but Jasmine stopped him cold. "No," she said. "You don't get to rewrite this. There was no confusion. There was judgment, loud and clear." More passengers were starting to gather, eyes flicking from one face to another. A man in a baseball cap leaned near the wall. A woman whispered to her husband. A young person crouched by a charging station, typing furiously on their phone. The story was already moving, faster than any PR team could hope to catch it. Jasmine adjusted the strap of her bag and turned to Franklin. "Let's go." "You sure?" he asked. "Yeah, there's nothing left here they can explain." They walked away without another word. No TSA escort, no airline rep trailing behind with a fake smile or a voucher in hand. No seat upgrade, just silence. And behind them, a wave of regret none of those employees expected to feel when they came to work that morning. But what came next would go far beyond terminal walls. By the time they reached the parking lot, Jasmine's phone was buzzing with missed calls and texts. She didn't answer any of them. Her hand stayed wrapped around the suitcase handle, but she hadn't opened the trunk yet. She needed air, real space to cool the fire still licking at her ribs. Franklin stood beside her, watching the terminal doors like they owed him something. Maybe they did. "They didn't expect me to walk in," he said quietly. "They didn't expect anyone to care," Jasmine replied. He looked at her. "You okay?" She nodded again. Not the kind that meant yes, the kind that meant I will be. Inside the terminal, the ripple was already taking shape. Videos had been uploaded. One clip showed Jasmine being escorted by TSA, head high, unbothered, while officers avoided her eyes. Another captured Franklin confronting the staff, calm, commanding. It was too late for damage control now. In a small break room behind the southwest counter, the young gate agent, Cullen, sat slouched in a chair, eyes on the floor, hands knotted. His name tag tilted sideways. The gate manager stood by the door, arms folded. "You could have just moved her to another seat," the manager said. "I didn't know who she was," Cullen muttered. "That's not the point. You don't treat anyone like that, known or not." "I thought she was being difficult." "She asked a question. That's not a crime." Cullen didn't answer. He didn't need to. The weight of it was already crashing in. How deeply he'd misjudged the moment, and how very publicly it had all gone wrong. He'd rolled his eyes at a woman who had earned her power by knowing exactly when not to raise her voice. And now, the world was watching. Outside, Franklin leaned against the car while Jasmine finally scrolled through her phone. A message from a staffer in D.C. A journalist already reached out. Another from her aunt in Jackson. "He would have been proud of you, Jazz. Don't let them make you small." Jasmine took a long breath. "They're going to try to spin this," she said. "They can try," Franklin replied, "but it's already public. I just wanted to go to a funeral." "I know." There was a pause, the kind that filled the air with everything unsaid. She looked up at him. "Did I handle it right?" Franklin tilted his head slightly. "You didn't give them what they wanted. That's more than most people could have done. It wasn't just about being right. It was about being human, and watching that humanity get ignored like it meant nothing." Inside the terminal, a regional supervisor had arrived. Statements were being collected, reports filed, damage control strategies quietly deployed. They were already drafting language designed to sound apologetic, without ever admitting fault. That corporate middle ground where remorse is suggested, but accountability is avoided. But this wasn't going away. Not this time. Because it wasn't just about Jasmine. People watching saw their own mothers, their own daughters, their wives, their friends. They recognized the look, the tone, the quiet rejection wrapped in protocol. The kind of treatment that says, you don't belong here, even when everything in your hand says you do. Anger followed fast. First behind the scenes, then on social media. Hours later, the airline issued a carefully worded statement. We regret the incident involving Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett and are reviewing our procedures to ensure every customer is treated with respect and professionalism. No names, no responsibility. But it didn't matter anymore, because dignity shouldn't require a title, and respect should never be situational. That night, Jasmine sat on the edge of a hotel bed in Jackson, Mississippi. Room service sat untouched beside her. The memorial had ended without her. Franklin was downstairs making a few calls. Her family had sent pictures, tried to sound cheerful, not disappointed. But she could hear it anyway, in the pauses, in the soft, sad silence that followed. We missed you. She opened her phone. Headlines were everywhere. Congresswoman Crockett removed from flight. TSA and airline under fire. Public outrage builds over wrongful detainment of federal official. She didn't want to read them. She didn't need someone else's version. But what caught her off guard, what stopped her, were the comments. Not the outrage. That was expected. It was the recognition. Story after story. Teachers, nurses, veterans, elderly passengers. A woman from Arizona wrote, I didn't have a title, so they talked to me like I was nothing. I didn't fight back. I just cried in the bathroom. A man from Oakland posted, the way they handled her is how they treated my father. He missed his heart surgery. No one apologized. The posts kept coming, and that's when it hit her. This wasn't just about Gate 22B. This was about something older, something far too common. Franklin returned, placing his phone on the desk. You're everywhere, he said. I know. He studied her face for a moment. You want to talk about it? She shook her head. Not yet. He sat beside her. You did the right thing, even when they didn't. Jasmine looked toward the window. Streetlights glowed, cars drifted past, the city quietly moving. They treated me like I was invisible, she said, like I didn't belong, even after I showed them who I was. Franklin nodded. You think they'll learn from it? I don't know, she said, but maybe someone else will. Because moments like this, moments where someone is quietly dismissed, publicly embarrassed, don't just fade, they stick. Not always for the ones who caused them, but for the ones who lived them, and for the people who watched, remembering, realizing, this has happened to me too. Later that week, Jasmine returned to D.C. She turned down the TV interviews. She didn't want to become a symbol. She wanted a conversation, not a spectacle. Instead, she wrote a letter. Newspapers published it nationwide. In it, she wrote, This isn't about one gate or one airline. It's about how quickly some people in power forget the rules of human decency. About how easily someone's voice can be dismissed when it doesn't come wrapped in privilege. Dignity is not something that should be earned or awarded. It should be automatic, every single time. That line went viral. Eventually, the airline released a second, more detailed apology. This time, they used her name. But the public had already moved forward. They had written their own version of the story, one where Jasmine Crockett wasn't just a congresswoman. She was a symbol for every person who had ever been overlooked, talked down to, or pushed aside. She hadn't yelled. She hadn't threatened. She had simply stood still. And in that stillness, she made the world pay attention. The message didn't belong to her alone. It belonged to everyone who had quietly waited for someone, anyone, to finally say something. A week later, Jasmine sat on a bench outside Union Station. She had just met with a group of young interns working on civil rights policy. They didn't ask about politics. They asked about the airport. One of them, a 19-year-old named Talia, said softly, I saw the video. I've been treated like that before. I didn't know what to say. But you didn't say much either. And it was loud. That stayed with Jasmine, because sometimes what the moment calls for isn't noise, it's presence. A stillness so firm, so undeniable, that the world has no choice but to see itself. She thought back to the gate agent, the look on his face when Franklin asked for his name, the silence that followed, the realization that he hadn't just disrespected a passenger, he'd exposed himself to a truth he wasn't ready to face, and she remembered what Franklin had told her the night they returned to Fort Worth. Most people think power comes from a badge or a desk, he'd said, but real power is knowing who you are and never letting anyone take that from you. That was the lesson, not just for the airline, for everyone. Because this wasn't an isolated incident, it was just the one that got caught on camera. What about the woman trying to make her daughter's graduation, the man flying to a job interview, the grandmother traveling home to bury her brother? What happens when they get dismissed? It should never take a title to be treated like a person. Jasmine leaned back, watching the crowd pass by, coffee cups in hand, briefcases swinging, earbuds in, heads down. Everyone trying to get somewhere, everyone just hoping the world lets them. She picked up her phone and sent one last message to her staff. Next town hall, we open with a story. Not about politics, about people, about what happened at Gate 22B. Because stories matter, not for the drama, not for the headlines, but because they hold up a mirror. And they ask, if that had been me, what would I have done? Or more importantly, if I had been the one in power, how would I have treated her? Because the lesson isn't shame, it's awareness, a reminder that dignity isn't a reward. It's a right. So to anyone who's ever been talked down to, brushed off, pushed aside, to anyone who's ever had to prove they belonged in a place they already paid to be, to anyone who's ever bitten their tongue out of fear their tone might be used against them, your story matters. And one day someone will speak it, with or without a camera watching. So the next time you're behind a desk or standing at a counter, look people in the eye, listen, don't assume. Because how we treat people when no one's watching says everything about who we are when everyone is. And if this story made you feel something, anger, empathy, recognition, then share it. Don't let it stay a headline. Let it be a reminder. And if you want more real stories like this, stories that reflect, reveal, and remind us what respect really looks like, make sure to subscribe, because the truth deserves to be heard, and so do the people living it.